How do we take care of heritage, considering its invisible values? Let's initiate the process by reviewing how we do it in the buildings. When we rehabilitate or reform buildings, we always start with their proper material and spatial recovery. Sometimes we can add some functions, like when the cloister of a cathedral must accommodate its museum, and very rarely do we dare to make important changes because it is worth a lot to maintain the contradictions of its history visible in that same cathedral, could be, or relieve it of its military past in order to convert it into a center of artistic creation and super public. We can even change the task of putting a roof on an archaeological site in the city center for the challenge of covering it with an Islamic garden that takes us back to the moment of splendor of those remains. We observe in these three examples that, even though we are physically intervening in the buildings, the goal is to alter a matter of memory or identity of the same. And how do we do it in the landscape? I have dedicated part of these last 15 years to better understand the landscape that crosses my city, that ancient Arab agricultural and irrigation environment known as the Orchard of Murcia in Spain. Similar landscapes surround many of our European cities. In them, the residential, productive, cultural, and natural have been overlapping for centuries, achieving a balance and exemplary. These territories share, in addition to these and other virtues, many of their threats, such as urban pressure, the abandonment of traditional productive activity, and the cultural loss and identity associated with these ways of life, as well as the loss of biodiversity and the bioclimatic and environmental health benefits that it brings to the city, and ultimately the reduction of their economically and ecologically viable future options. How to take care of them? Our war cry from Huerta Bizarra is very clear: do not musealize them, do not reduce their complexity, do not mummify them from the classic purely conservationist perspective. We must maintain their survival, expanding to the maximum the ways of comprehending them and creating an increasingly greater diversity of practices to operate in them. If we classify these practices, we would put in a first group those that preserve the material part of the heritage of these landscapes, which are their physical elements. If before we talked about buildings, now it's about fragments of public space, small works of civil engineering, monumental trees, unique furniture, etc. How can the remains of an abandoned mill or the gates of an irrigation system be? When dealing with elements immersed in the territory, it is extremely important to open up the zoom, to pay attention beyond the physical element and its immediate surroundings, to carefully review its functional environment, for example, renaturalizing the edges of the area we are working on, ensuring a good connection with public transportation and soft mobility networks, reducing the impact of dissonant elements, or also protecting those other secondary elements of the landscape that give it its meaning and identity, such as small domestic architectures or historical subdivisions. Let's move on to the second group of practices, in which we would include those that deal with those non-physical elements of the territory, with that intangible heritage of customs, characters, crafts, recipes, songs, games, and natural sounds, traditional vegetation, little known but essential corners in the preservation of the identity of the communities, and so on. To tackle this, at Huerta Bizarra, we develop strategies. Let's examine a few instances, such as a delightful family Sunday morning outing, transforming into a collaborative mapping encounter involving citizens and experts who, while exploring the surroundings, are actively constructing a public map of the relevant concerns. A school version of these collaborative mappings includes participation from family members, often older ones, who act as experts. Distributing roles and tasks among students during the activity will allow them to practice, cross, and reinterpret educational competencies. The creation of a school mural helps to awaken a certain sense of responsibility for the landscape that has deteriorated. If, while classifying the plastic remains extracted from a nearby ditch, we attempt to estimate the percentage that might originate from other girls and boys of the identical age. As those who are conducting this task, we have the ability to envision, produce, and experiment with a collection of portable microarchitectures that substitute structures, deploying human activities on the landscape without causing harm to it. A bike trailer, kitchen, or classroom show that not urbanizing so much land or learning to design together the transformations of places, like a lookout corner, thinking about its ideal use with the same girls and boys from the environment who will use it in the future, and even creating an outdoor adventure with remote assistance loaded with simulations, technologies, and ephemeral installations in which emotional bonds are created with the environment being interpreted, and that, with a little luck, will extend to similar contexts. And what do these experiences have in common? I want to believe that a particular nonchalance, that term that the Royal Spanish Academy, RAE, defines as a great ease and fluency in speaking or acting, and whose synonyms are nonchalance, ease, daring, impudence, audacity, insolence, or skillfulness. In Huerta Bizarra, we try to avoid these tasks when, like playing, rehearsing formats, surprising capabilities and methodologies, incorporating actors, visions, and unregulated knowledge from the pleasure that optimistic and tailor-made creation produces. Thank you very much for your attention, and let's play.